Hello, this is Tamu. Welcome to Thinking Out Loud. So today's topic of discussion will be Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and more importantly, its sales, which has sparked a lot of discussion recently as there has been recent data to come out providing light on the active players for Rebirth that peaked at 2.2 million players, and this is over the period of Rebirth's launch to April 10th. Whilst this isn't the most accurate representation of the data for sales, it is an indicator for many, and it suggests that Rebirth is underperforming in comparison to Remake, which sold 3.5 million copies in just 3 days. I think there's many variables here to consider when discussing Rebirth, particularly its sales. Overall, the reception for this game has looked pretty positive, like mostly overwhelming from what critics and fans alike are saying. I think that there is a lot of different discussions on things like the open world and overall its ending, but I think overall the general reception for Rebirth is a pretty positive one. What do these sales mean? Well, I think there's many variables to consider, whether or not this game is performing as well as expected, because I see people saying based on these sales that this game is a flop, and I definitely disagree with that. So let's run through the various different variables that are factoring in play here with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So the first one is obviously there are people that did want a one-to-one remake, who are turned off by the changes and the multiverse stuff that Remake took at the end and Rebirth obviously is further leaning into. Those people were probably not going to pick up part 2. So yeah, that's a rational mob of people who probably didn't like the game. But it's also important to consider the factor that firstly, Final Fantasy VII Remake was the first part in a trilogy for one, and secondly, it came out at the tail end of the PS4's life cycle, where most people at that time owned a PS4. And I get that we're according to Sony, halfway through the life cycle of the PS5, but the PS5 in general hasn't had as much steam and as much momentum as the PS4, with much less people owning PS5 games. And the video game landscape has kind of shifted since the PS4 era, where I would say a lot more PS5 games and PlayStation games in general are coming to Steam, and Rebirth is on that list, which brings me to the next component of this game. Final Fantasy VII Remake really did set a trend here for PC gamers, bringing this game across to Steam and platforms of the like. So I think there's also a subsect of people that are just waiting for this game to come to Steam. Many of those people who probably would have bought a PS4 or even a PS5 if this game had just remained exclusive to a console. Because I think that those sales for Remake were bolstered by people who would have thought at the time this game is only going to be on the PS4, not knowing it would come to Steam. But now with that intention in mind, those people are just going to wait this out. And there is another component as well that Square have said that this game is not a direct sequel, it can be played on its own, which is a lie. You need to at least have played Remake to play Rebirth. And I think that there's many people here who have yet to really just pick up Rebirth because they haven't played Remake. And that also factors into the last crowd of people that I would like to talk about here, which is, I believe, a bigger crowd than most people think, and that's people waiting for this whole trilogy to just be complete so they can play it as a holistic experience of all 3 parts. Because the last part could be go belly up, and it's is this really worth investing 100+ hours into to play all 3 of these games? And I think people are just waiting to assess how all 3 of these components go, because I think personally Rebirth is a great game independently and definitely is worth playing, but I think there's a lot of people out there that are wanting to see how this trilogy plays out altogether. So with all these groups in mind, it really does make a valid question, where does this game stand? And I think that over time, without a bigger value proposition for people to buy a PS5, whilst this game is just exclusive to the console, I don't see sales really going gangbusters for this game. I just think that there's a lot of other variables. I don't think that this is a reflection of Rebirth being a bad game, like many people want it to look like. I think it's just more that more people are waiting for this game to just be fully complete, like the trilogy project, or they're just waiting to see this game come to Steam or something of that nature. There's not a big reason for anyone to really buy a PS5 at this point if they haven't already got one. But again, I don't like this sentiment that this game is therefore bad because it didn't sell super well. There's plenty of games over the years that haven't sold incredibly well that are great games. And I think that there's games that just continue to sell crazy units every single year that I don't think are the best games that have come out. I mean, I think that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a fantastic game, and I think over time, this is my hot take on the whole matter, when we see this game come to Steam, we will see an influx of sales for this game go up. I think when the PS5 becomes more of a console that people buy, if that's the case, like more commonly accessible, and people just want to own a PS5 because there's a bigger catalog of games that are worth getting, I think that we'll see a bump in sales for Rebirth. And of course, and this is what I'm predicting for the future, when all 3 games come out, we will see a significant bump for both Remake and Rebirth alongside Part 3. So many people will be buying all 3 of these games. I reckon a lot of people will be. And then obviously they're going to make, in like the future, once all 3 of these are done, they'll make a collaboration game with all 3 of them and call it Recollection or something. They'll 100% do that, just knowing how Square Enix are. This game in of itself is not to be like disregarded or told that it's bad because of sales. And I just think that that general sentiment is a bad way of thinking when we view video games. Like, I look at many games, like you look at a lot of games from Arcane, like one in particular, Prey. That underperformed, but that is a great game. And a lot of people really like it, you know? And there's plenty of other games that just have a lot of, like, a dedicated fan base. A lot of people who really do like these games. And then there's other games that perform really well that people don't really like, but people will still buy it. I guess to sum this video up, I just want to say that sales aren't indicative of quality. I think that a game underperforming is just more of a showcase of either disinterest or it not being accessible enough, and I think with Rebirth it is more the latter. This game isn't accessible to enough people. Not enough people have a PS5 or are willing to get a PS5 just to play Rebirth, and more people are probably more willing to wait for this game to come to PC, knowing that it is inevitable this time around. So I guess only time will tell whether or not I'm right or wrong with the Steam release of the game. In the long term, Final Fantasy Rebirth looks like it's going to have a prosperous future, I reckon. And I think overall, if you don't like the game, that's totally fine, but assess it on the merits of the actual game itself and what you don't like about the video game. Don't go to sales. I feel like it's just a weird angle that people are trying to look for to find a reason to not like it. If you want to hear my thoughts on Rebirth, I'll leave a link to that down below. And yeah, thanks for tuning in and watching this video this far. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below. I love chatting to you all, and have a good one.